Breaking news tonight, a Malaysia Airlines flight with 239 people on board, including 4 Americans, has gone missing.
In March 2014, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people vanished from radar. No wreckage, no black box, no answers. 12 years later, a retired British engineer named Richard Godfrey says he knows exactly where it is. He has coordinates. He has data. He has a method that has never been used in aviation investigation before. And the world is only now beginning to listen. It was an ordinary night. March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur at 12:41 in the morning. The destination was Beijing. 239 people were on board. Families, business travelers, children, the kind of people who check their bags, find their seats, and expect to land safely on the other side. For the first 38 minutes, everything was normal. Air traffic control tracked the plane. The transponder was sending signals. The crew checked in. There was nothing unusual, nothing that would make anyone watching a radar screen think twice. Then, at 1:19 in the morning, the co-pilot spoke his last recorded words to air traffic control. "Good night, Malaysian 370. It was a routine sign-off, the kind pilots say hundreds of times a year. No one knew those would be the last words ever heard from that cockpit. 7 minutes later, the plane's transponder went silent. It did not crash in that moment. Radar data would later show the aircraft turned. It turned sharply. It moved away from its planned route and flew back over the Malaysian peninsula. Military radar tracked it for a time. Then it disappeared into the darkness over the Indian Ocean. What followed was the largest aviation search in recorded history. Ships, planes, and submarines from more than 24 countries swept millions of square miles of open ocean. They found almost nothing. A small number of debris pieces eventually washed ashore on islands and coastlines thousands of miles away. Scientists confirmed several of those pieces came from a Boeing 777. But the main wreckage, the fuselage, the engines, the flight recorders, none of it has ever been found. The official investigation struggled from the beginning. There were disagreements between governments. Data was withheld and later released. The timeline kept shifting. The search zones moved. Hundreds of millions of dollars were spent. And still, the ocean gave up almost nothing. For the families of those 239 people, the silence has been unbearable. They have waited 12 years for an answer that has never come. Some have refused to accept that their loved ones are gone because there is still no proof of exactly where or exactly how. That is the wound that MH370 left on the world. Not just the loss, but the not knowing. And into that silence, one man decided he was going to find the answer himself. Richard Godfrey is not a government investigator. He does not work for Malaysia Airlines. He was never hired by any search agency. He is a retired British aerospace engineer who spent decades working on complex technical systems. When MH370 disappeared, he did what engineers do. He started asking questions, and he did not stop. For years, Godfrey worked quietly. He studied every piece of publicly available data. He read the official reports. He analyzed the satellite communications, the radar logs, the drift analysis of the debris that washed ashore. He connected with other independent researchers around the world who were doing the same thing. A small, informal network of scientists, engineers, and analysts who refused to accept that a modern commercial aircraft could simply vanish without a traceable path. What sets Godfrey apart from the many theorists who have offered explanations over the years is his discipline. He does not speculate wildly. He does not chase headlines. Every claim he makes is supported by data, and he publishes his methodology openly so that other experts can examine it, challenge it, and test it. That transparency is unusual, and it has earned him serious respect in the aviation and scientific communities. In 2021, Godfrey introduced something that changed the entire conversation around MH370. He began applying a technology called WSPR to the problem. It is a radio-based system that had never before been used in aviation investigation. When he first proposed it, many people were skeptical. Some were dismissive. But Godfrey kept working. He kept refining his analysis, and the picture that emerged from that data was unlike anything the official search had produced. He published his findings. He presented them to researchers, journalists, and aviation experts. He put specific coordinates on the table, not a broad search zone, not a general area of ocean, a specific location on the floor of the southern Indian Ocean, where he believes MH370 came to rest. To understand why those coordinates matter, and why some of the most respected voices in aviation investigation have taken them seriously, you first have to understand the tool he used to find them. But before that, consider what it means that a single retired engineer, working without government funding or official access, has produced one of the most precise and data-supported location estimates in the entire 12-year history of this investigation. The official searches, backed by the resources of multiple nations, have come up largely empty. Godfrey, working from his home with publicly available data, arrived at a specific point on a map. That either means the official searches have been looking in the wrong place, or it means Godfrey has found something the world's governments have quietly known for a long time, but have not acted on. Neither possibility is comfortable. If you value deep investigations like this, consider subscribing. This channel is dedicated to finding the truth behind the stories the world hasn't finished telling. To understand what Richard Godfrey found, you have to understand how WSPR works. And the good news is, you do not need a science degree to follow it. The concept, once broken down, is actually quite simple, and once you understand it, the implications are hard to ignore. WSPR stands for Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. It is a radio communication system developed by Nobel Prize-winning physicist Joe Taylor in the early 2000s. It was not designed for aviation. It was not designed for tracking aircraft. It was built for amateur radio operators to test how far their signals could travel across the Earth using very low power. Ham radio enthusiasts around the world use it constantly. Thousands of WSPR stations transmit and receive signals every day, and every contact between stations is automatically logged in a publicly accessible global database. Here is where it becomes relevant to MH370. When a WSPR radio signal travels from one station to another, it passes through the atmosphere in a relatively predictable path. But if something large and metallic passes through that signal path, the signal is disturbed. It bends slightly. It changes in a measurable way. The receiving station records those changes, even if no one at the time was paying attention to what caused them. Think of it like sonar, but using radio waves instead of sound. You send a signal across a stretch of ocean. If something is there, the signal behaves differently than it would in empty space. You can detect the presence of an object without ever seeing it directly. Godfrey recognized that on the night MH370 disappeared, the global WSPR network was active. Thousands of signals were crossing the Indian Ocean and surrounding regions. Those signals were recorded. The data was stored, and no one had ever gone back to look at it through the lens of aircraft detection. That is exactly what Godfrey did. He developed a methodology to analyze historical WSPR data and identify anomalies that are consistent with a large metallic object, specifically a Boeing 777, passing through radio signal paths at specific times and locations. He then cross-referenced those anomalies with the known flight performance characteristics of MH370. Its speed, its altitude range, its fuel capacity, and the satellite handshake data that had already been analyzed by official investigators. What he found was a trail, a series of disturbances in the WSPR data that align with a flight path moving south through the Indian Ocean in the hours after MH370 disappeared from radar. The trail does not jump around. It does not scatter randomly. It follows a coherent, physically plausible route for a large commercial aircraft flying on autopilot. Independent experts have reviewed his methodology. Some have raised technical questions, as serious researchers always do, but none have been able to definitively disprove the core finding. The WSPR data shows something was there. Something large, something moving. The question is where that something finally stopped. When MH370 vanished from civilian radar, it did not simply fall out of the sky. That much has been established. Military radar in Malaysia tracked the aircraft as it turned back across the peninsula. It flew northwest for a time. Then it turned again, heading south, and then it disappeared beyond the reach of any ground-based radar system. What investigators did have was a series of automated satellite communications. The aircraft's satellite data unit was still functioning after the transponder was switched off. It continued to exchange brief automated signals with an Inmarsat satellite orbiting above the Indian Ocean. These signals are called handshakes. They are not voice communications. They carry almost no information, but they contain enough data to calculate the approximate distance between the aircraft and the satellite at the moment each signal was sent. Using those handshakes, investigators drew a series of arcs across the map. The aircraft had to be somewhere on those arcs at those specific times. The final handshake came at 8:19 in the morning, roughly 7 hours after takeoff. After that, silence. The satellite heard nothing more from MH370. Official investigators used this arc data to define a broad search zone in the southern Indian Ocean. They searched it. They found nothing. They expanded the zone. Still nothing. The search was eventually suspended, resumed by a private company, and suspended again. Each time, the ocean gave back almost nothing. Godfrey's WSPR analysis added a layer on top of this existing framework. Instead of working only with the satellite arcs, which define possible positions but not a specific path, his radio wave data suggests a much more defined route. His analysis indicates the aircraft flew in a relatively straight southerly path after making its final turn, consistent with autopilot control, and that it maintained a steady altitude and speed for most of that journey. This matters for one critical reason. If the plane was on autopilot, flying straight and level, then when the fuel ran out, it would have followed a predictable descent pattern. It would not have glided erratically. It would have come down in a relatively concentrated area. That makes the search zone smaller, much smaller than what official investigators have been working with. Godfrey's data points to a location approximately 993 kilometers west-northwest of Perth, Australia. The water there is deep, extremely deep. In some areas, the ocean floor sits more than 4 kilometers below the surface. The terrain is rugged, with underwater ridges and valleys that would make sonar scanning difficult and expensive. But difficult is not impossible. What is harder to explain is why, given the specificity of Godfrey's analysis and the serious attention it has received from credible experts. No government has committed to searching that precise location. The coordinates exist. The methodology is published. The data is publicly available for anyone to examine. Something is either being missed, or something is being avoided. If you value deep investigations like this, consider subscribing. This channel exists because some questions deserve more than silence. Richard Godfrey has not been vague. That is what makes his work different from the dozens of theories that have circulated since MH370 disappeared. He has not pointed to a general region of ocean and said the plane is somewhere in there. He has published specific coordinates, latitude and longitude, a precise point on the floor of the southern Indian Ocean that his analysis identifies as the most probable resting place of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. Those coordinates place the aircraft at approximately 33.177 degrees south, 95.300 degrees east. It is a location that sits outside the areas searched by the official Australian-led investigation between 2014 and 2017. It is also outside the zone searched by Ocean Infinity, the private underwater search company that conducted an additional hunt in 2018. If Godfrey is correct, the plane has been sitting in unsearched water this entire time. He did not arrive at these coordinates quickly or carelessly. His analysis evolved over several years. He refined his WSPR methodology repeatedly. He incorporated drift modeling studies conducted by other independent researchers, including work by oceanographer David Griffin and debris analyst Blaine Gibson, who tracked the physical movement of confirmed MH370 debris across the Indian Ocean and worked backward to estimate where the plane entered the water. Multiple independent lines of analysis, developed by different researchers using different methods, have converged on a similar area of ocean. That convergence is significant. When separate investigators using separate tools arrive at similar conclusions without coordinating their results in advance, it adds weight to the finding. It is not proof, but it is not nothing either. The response from governments has been muted. Malaysia, Australia, and China, the three nations most directly involved in the official investigation, have acknowledged Godfrey's work in general terms. There have been polite statements about the value of independent research. There have been no commitments to search the specific location he identified. In late 2022 and into 2023, there were renewed discussions between the Malaysian government and Ocean Infinity about a possible new search. Those discussions centered on a no-find, no-fee arrangement, meaning the search company would only be paid if wreckage was actually located. The talks have moved slowly. Announcements have been made and then quietly walked back. Timelines have shifted. As of the time this script was written, no underwater vehicle has been sent to the coordinates Godfrey published. The families of the 239 people aboard MH370 are aware of his work. Some have spoken publicly in support of a targeted search of his identified location. They have written letters. They have given interviews. They have asked, clearly and with remarkable patience, why a specific set of coordinates supported by years of independent analysis cannot receive a focused underwater search. No government has given them a satisfying answer. And that silence, measured and deliberate, raises a question that is difficult to dismiss. Is it incompetence? Is it cost? Or does someone already know something that makes a search feel unnecessary? There is a pattern in the MH370 search history that becomes visible only when you step back and look at all of it together. The search zones have moved. They have expanded and contracted. They have shifted north and south along the seventh arc. But there is one area, the area that Godfrey's analysis and several independent drift studies point to, that has consistently remained just outside the boundary of every major search effort. That could be coincidence. In an investigation this complex, covering millions of square kilometers of open ocean, gaps are inevitable. No search is perfect. The technology has limitations. The ocean floor in this region is among the least mapped terrain on Earth. Some areas have never been surveyed at any meaningful resolution. Sending an underwater vehicle into this environment is slow, expensive, and technically demanding work, but the pattern is persistent enough that serious researchers have begun asking whether the search boundaries were drawn correctly in the first place. The original search zone was defined largely by the Inmarsat satellite ARC data and a set of assumptions about the aircraft's speed and altitude during its final hours. Those assumptions were reasonable given what was known at the time. But assumptions can be wrong, and if the starting assumptions were even slightly off, the resulting search zone could be displaced by hundreds of kilometers. This is precisely what Godfrey and others have argued. The official models assumed a particular flight path and a particular set of end conditions. Godfrey's WSPR data suggests the actual flight path was slightly different. Not dramatically different, not wildly inconsistent with the satellite data, but different enough that the final resting point falls outside the area that has been searched. There is also the question of the underwater terrain itself. The southern Indian Ocean floor in this region is not flat. It is fractured and complex, shaped by ancient tectonic activity into a landscape of ridges, valleys, and steep escarpments. An aircraft lying in a deep valley between two ridges could potentially be missed by sonar equipment sweeping from above, depending on the angle and resolution of the scan. Some researchers have raised the possibility that previous searches may have passed over the wreckage, without detecting it, simply because of how the debris settled into the terrain. Ocean Infinity used some of the most advanced autonomous underwater vehicles available during their 2018 search. The technology was genuinely impressive, but their search area was still defined by the same underlying assumptions that guided earlier efforts. If those assumptions placed the search zone in the wrong location, better technology simply means a more thorough search of the wrong place. Independent researcher Victor Ianello, who has collaborated with Godfrey on parts of his analysis, has written extensively about the possibility that the search has been systematically offset from the true impact point. His work, like Godfrey's, is detailed, technical, and publicly available. It has been read by official investigators. It has been acknowledged, and it has not changed the search boundaries. What would it take to move those boundaries? What evidence threshold must be crossed before a government commits resources to a new targeted search of a specific location? That question has never been answered clearly, and in that absence of clarity, something else begins to grow. Not conspiracy, not fantasy, just a very reasonable suspicion that the full picture has not yet been shared. If you value deep investigations like this, consider subscribing. There are stories the world has half forgotten that still deserve a full answer. In November 2021, Richard Godfrey published a detailed technical paper outlining his WSPR-based analysis of MH370 flight path. It was not a press release. It was not a social media post. It was a structured, methodical document running to dozens of pages, containing data tables, signal analysis, cross-referenced coordinates, and a step-by-step explanation of his methodology. He shared it with aviation researchers, satellite data experts, and members of the independent MH370 research community. He invited scrutiny. He asked people to find flaws in his work. The response was not what the mainstream media reported it to be. Several credible voices raised technical concerns about WSPR as an aircraft detection tool. That is a fair and important part of the scientific process. The core question was whether WSPR signal anomalies could be reliably attributed to a specific aircraft rather than to atmospheric interference, other aircraft, or natural variation in radio propagation. These are legitimate questions. Godfrey acknowledged them. He refined his analysis in response. He did not retreat from his findings. He sharpened them. What received far less attention was the response from the broader expert community. A number of researchers with serious credentials in satellite communications, radio frequency analysis, and oceanographic drift modeling reviewed his work and found it credible. Not proven beyond doubt, but credible, worthy of further investigation, worthy of a targeted underwater search. That measured, qualified support never generated the same headlines as the criticism. This is a pattern that appears throughout the MH370 investigation. Work that challenges official conclusions receives intense early scrutiny and then fades from public view. Work that supports the official narrative, or that simply concludes the plane cannot be found, receives quieter but more sustained institutional support. The result is that the public conversation about MH370 has remained stuck in a loop. The same questions, the same non-answers, the same annual anniversaries with the same statements from governments expressing sorrow and commitment to finding the truth. Meanwhile, Godfrey kept working. In 2022, he updated his analysis. In 2023, he published further refinements. Each iteration incorporated new data, new peer feedback, and new cross-referencing with drift studies and satellite analysis conducted by other independent researchers. The coordinates he identified have remained essentially stable across multiple rounds of refinement. That stability is itself meaningful. When a methodology produces consistent results across repeated testing with updated inputs, it suggests the underlying approach is capturing something real. He brought his findings to the attention of the Malaysian government. He communicated with official investigators. He participated in conferences and forums where MH370 research was being discussed at a technical level. He was not ignored entirely, but he was also never given what his work arguably warranted: a formal, targeted search of the specific location his data identifies. There is one more layer to this that deserves careful attention. Several of the governments involved in the MH370 investigation have access to military and intelligence surveillance data from the night the plane disappeared that has never been fully disclosed to the public or to the official investigation teams. This is not speculation. It has been acknowledged in general terms by officials from multiple countries. Military radar and signals intelligence from that night exist. The full picture of what those systems detected has not been released. If that data were consistent with Godfrey's flight path analysis, releasing it would add enormous weight to the case for searching his identified coordinates. If it contradicted his analysis, releasing it would allow the investigation to move in a more productive direction. Either way, the information would be valuable. It has not been released, and in that gap between what is known and what is shared, the families of 239 people continue to wait. Consider for a moment what it would mean if Richard Godfrey is correct. Not just for the investigation, not just for the families, but for everything that sits behind this story. The systems, the institutions, the assumptions about how the modern world tracks the things that move through it. A Boeing 777 is not a small object. It is nearly 70 meters long. It weighs close to 300 tons when fully loaded. It carries transponders, satellite communication systems, emergency locator transmitters, and multiple redundant tracking technologies. It flies through airspace monitored by military and civilian radar systems, operated by some of the most technically advanced nations on Earth. And yet, in March 2014, one of these aircraft flew for 7 hours after its transponder was switched off, and no one stopped it, redirected it, or even fully tracked where it went. That fact alone should have triggered a fundamental rethinking of global aviation surveillance. In some ways it did. The International Civil Aviation Organization introduced new tracking requirements in the years following MH370 disappearance. Airlines are now required to report aircraft position more frequently. New satellite-based tracking systems have been deployed. The gaps that allowed MH370 to disappear for 7 hours have been partially addressed. But partially is not completely. And the deeper question, the one that Godfrey's work forces back into focus, is not just about tracking technology. It is about accountability, about what happens when a system fails at this scale, and the institutions responsible for that system cannot produce a clear answer about why. If Godfrey is right, and a targeted search of his coordinates locates the wreckage of MH370, several things follow immediately. The flight recorders, if recoverable, would finally reveal what happened in that cockpit. The cause of the disappearance, whether mechanical failure, deliberate action, or something else entirely, would be established. The families would have answers. The aircraft would be found, and the world would have to confront the fact that a retired engineer working from publicly available data found the plane that governments spent hundreds of millions of dollars and 12 years failing to locate. That last point carries weight that goes beyond this one investigation. It raises questions about how official searches are conducted, about whether the boundaries of those searches were drawn using the best available analysis, or using analysis that was convenient, politically manageable, or simply the product of institutional momentum rather than genuine scientific rigor. It also raises questions about the role of independent researchers in investigations of this kind. Godfrey is not alone. The independent MH370 research community includes engineers, mathematicians, oceanographers, and satellite experts who have contributed serious, peer-reviewed quality work to this investigation without any official mandate or financial compensation. They have done this because the problem matters, because 239 people and their families deserve an answer, because the unexplained disappearance of a commercial aircraft in the age of global surveillance is a wound in the public's understanding of how safe and how transparent the systems they depend on actually are. If the wreckage is found where Godfrey says it is, the world will need to ask who knew what and when. The military surveillance data that has never been released will become impossible to ignore. The decisions made about where to search, and where not to search, will be examined with new intensity, and the answers to those questions may be more uncomfortable than the mystery itself has been. There is a version of this story where MH370 is eventually found. The recorders are recovered, and a clear mechanical or human explanation emerges. That version brings grief, but also closure. It allows the aviation industry to learn, adapt, and improve. It gives the families something solid to hold. And there is another version, one where the wreckage is found, and the recorders reveal something that explains not just the disappearance of the aircraft, but also the strange, persistent reluctance of governments to look in the right place. That version is harder to sit with, but it cannot be ruled out. Not yet. Not while the coordinates remain unsearched and the military data remains unreleased. Richard Godfrey is still working. He continues to refine his analysis. He continues to publish. He continues to answer questions from researchers and journalists and the families of the people who were on that plane. He has not been proven right, but he has not been proven wrong. And in the southern Indian Ocean, in deep water that no underwater vehicle has yet visited with his coordinates in hand, the answer is waiting. It has been waiting for 12 years. The only question left is whether anyone with the power to look will finally decide to go and find it.